We have a chat function in the Teams, so if you have any questions, you can pop them in there, or you can raise your hand at the end. And if you experience any technical issues, let us know in the chat and we will try to solve them. I will give you a little bit of an overview of the Climate Hub. We are a Scottish government-funded organisation, and our aim is to support climate action that is community-led. Our vision is for communities throughout the Highlands and Islands to be bold, collaborative and resilient by creating climate-friendly projects and initiatives which address the needs of their communities and lead to a transformational climate-ready region. What does this mean in practice? Basically, we offer support to community groups that are already established or those who want to get established, as well as community groups that are climate focused and community groups that aren't. We foster collaboration and partnership between groups and between agencies and community groups. We offer education and training. This session is a Skillshare, so we hear from agencies and community groups about their experience. They will share their knowledge with us, and so that we can learn from them. But we also have other types of training, like funding masterclasses, soon probably a carbon literacy training as well. We celebrate community climate action through our social media channels. We use them very often. We always try to show the positive impact that all of our members have through their climate action. We help groups building capacity, whether it's to get a project ready or stepping in as a volunteer for some events. We often meet with Scottish Government and local authorities, and we bring your feedback with us. We voice it in front of them. And we have funding support available, small pots of funding. There's a Climate Action Fund, which is now closing, but will reopen again end of April. That is up to £500 for starting a new project or a new organization, as well as sustainable spaces funding, and also soon, early summer, we will open applications for the Highlands and Islands Climate Festival. So if you want to have an event, keep an eye on our socials, and yeah, well, you can apply through there. Our area obviously covers the Highlands and Islands, so Highland Council, Orkney Islands Council, Shetland Islands Council. But as you can see, we are now 24 climate hubs across Scotland. And we're a membership organization, so we accept any forms of membership, organizations, individuals, and associates. We offer peer-to-peer learning opportunities and members events, and you can access our funding that I mentioned previously. You can have dedicated and tailored support. As I mentioned previously, we bring your voice to Scottish Government, and also you can feel part of a community who wants to fight the climate emergency. So please join us as a member. It is free and it takes 5 minutes, and you will be added to our monthly newsletter and monthly funding finders as well. If you'd like to have a chat or get support, feel free to contact us via the general email, or we have dedicated officers in each area. I am the development officer for Orkney, Andrea is for Shetlands, But on our website, you will find everyone else. Also, you can find us on social media. And that was me. Now I will give the floor to Mark from Community Energy Scotland. He will tell us more about the status of community energy and what we can do at the moment about community energy. So when you're ready, Mark.
Thank you, Francesca. I took the title and hopefully what I'm going to speak about off what was sent around people, which was navigating the new energy generation for communities. If I can click on the right place. What I'm proposing is a brief presentation, how we got here and where we're at, I'm calling it. So as Francesca says, I'm Mark Hull, Chief Technical Officer, Community Energy Scotland. I'm very fortunate I started as a volunteer and still am a trustee a number of organisations, but on my own island in Orkney, but then started to work at CES and now have a international role, but I'm still lucky to be based in Orkney, fulfilling that role. So yeah, Community Energy Scotland, the usual thing I would introduce who we are. Community Energy Scotland is an independent member-based and led more than profit organisation, we like to call ourselves. It was founded in 2007 after nearly a decade as the Community Energy Unit as part of Highlands and Islands Enterprise. And we're Scotland's only national charity dedicated to supporting communities across Scotland to develop their own decarbonisation and renewable energy projects, actions and plans. Our core purpose is given us to build confidence, resilience and wealth at community level in Scotland through sustainable energy development. It's a bit of an advert, but it's just a description of who we are really. We've got 30 staff we're spread across Scotland, including 16 of them on the North and Western Isles and Highland region, and over 400 members. We're a member-based organisation, they're mostly non-profit distributing community groups, and we supported over 1,500 community energy projects across Scotland, which are now creating somewhere in the region of 10 million per year locally from income and affordable energy. And these funds and activities support community anchor organisations, which I'll touch on later, and facilities, creating places and reasons to gather, thrive and work together. But what does that really mean? Fundamentally, when we started, there was really sort of two main sorts of projects. The first ones are these sort of facility-based energy installations. They're typically smaller projects, often volunteer groups, but can be social enterprises. And they're making core community buildings and spaces more sustainable and usable. I say it's over 1,000 were supported and growing. After a while, there was a big surge to begin with. It went quieter, but especially over the last few years, we've really seen an increase as communities face facility-based organisations face huge price increases for energy and are looking at ways to solve that. And technologies become more available to be able to support that. But that's not really the topic for today. Today, what we was asked to speak on was really focusing on the second stream of activity over the last 2 decades, which are these revenue generating, we call RevGen projects. They're usually larger projects operating commercially, but instead of shareholders, they're owned by non-profit distributing members, member-based community social enterprises, and they earn revenue from community for community funds, which are then used to address local social issues regeneration across the whole community. I'll come back to Westry, but there's over 150 projects have been supported. More than 50 are operational. More coming, there's a question mark, and that's a bit of the sting in the tail of this presentation, but we'll come on to it as we go for that. The idea of this RevGen model, this revenue generating model, was born out of land justice very much in Scotland. We had very early on, we had community land buyouts across, there's a very early pioneering groups, a lot of whole islands did it, and the states were looking to do that. As communities got hold and an opportunity and responsibility of these assets, they then had to look and see how could they actually make them viable. And CS supported communities with pioneering energy projects, and most of them were to help make these assets and the states viable for communities. So they're both owning the problem and the solution to what they were having to deal with in their communities. But that very quickly got adapted for wider need and social uncertainty across Scotland, because the numbers of estates and the opportunities to buy out was quite limited. But the whole community development trust movement really was built on the back of this, where we're recognizing as something that we can adapt for more wider implications, and especially in Orkney, but elsewhere across the country. Westry were early pioneers, Tyee, Unst, Hoy, Shaughnessy, Stronsey, EDL, Applecross, Huntley. These are all ones that come forward. There's now hundreds of community development trusts across the country. And they're mostly places that have been faced with depopulation and vulnerability at the edge, other people tend to call us. But we've used the revenue generating energy projects to provide resource and continuity for our communities. That gives us these trusted local actors for community-led, long-sided planning and action, especially in our world where we're facing with the climate and biodiversity emergency response. How do we deal with this? These sort of organizations, these energy projects, are giving us a whole community holistic systems approach to change that we can do ourselves. We talk now about community anchor organizations in the sense that they anchor us for both present and future uncertainty. And that's what's coming through this. I'm obviously Orkney biased in many ways. And a quick illustration from Orkney was on the back of what we saw. Westry were very early on. They started before the turn of the millennia. And were supported early on, but they inspired other groups, and there's 5 other communities that all own these 900 kilowatt assets across the community. But also other variants. We've got Sandy had a joint venture with a private developer, and our own local council took 20% stake in a private development to create community assets. So across Orkney, we've got 7.5 megawatt of community owned to date. That to us was estimated to be 4 million per annum revenue. $500,000 per annum after cost as margin that's going into the community. And we were talking about 30 million over the project lifetimes. Rousey, Egglesey and Wyre, that was my bias. That was the community that we faced a social challenge and we looked for a solution. And one of it was putting up a turbine, which I'd founded the trust and we did on a voluntary basis to begin with. But since that turbine, since it started alone, has brought in more than 2.5 million to date to the community. So that was it, a quick thing. And it is a quick illustration of what that means to us. What's the benefit? We had 10 years in at the turbine. We just looked and said, what have we done? We used that resource, we used that funding, we've used having that organisation to improve shared facilities and combating fuel poverty. That's the local manse that's become a community building effectively. You can see renewables in there, but we insulated it. We used the upstairs for offices. We enhanced home care and support. What's going to keep folk in our community? That picture was at a bonfire night, the youngest member of the community giving a bunch of flowers to the oldest member of the community with more than 100 years between them. Ironically for me, that newborn that's in that picture has had her own baby just last year. So the cycle's gone on and it's more than 20 years on since that photo was taken. But just fundamentally, what could we do? What did we need to do that others weren't doing for us? So improving roads, enabling internet connections, maintaining fuel supply and services in an island tied in with a local petrol pump. But also we had ambition to do stuff ourselves. And early on, we were funding growing spaces. This is a polytunnel. Above that, you can actually see allotments. Even in places like Rousey, with social housing, those identified a need for allotments and opportunities to have growing spaces. And travel, mobility and support and bursaries. That was an EV that we got back in 2013 that we just been running as a car club. But mostly what we do with our island is we give people bursaries to go and use centralised services as they can and prevent the barriers put in place by location. Also open skills, a training support. We identified really early on, I think, the way to get folk to be able to support people in the community is often training. Let them follow their interest and their passion. We had a lot of microgen wind turbines going up in Orkney, so we're looking at trainings for servicing that, creating enterprise and creating business in our community and outside our community. We created craft organisations. The craft hub here now has more than a third of the residents actually contributing material, and it's run as a social enterprise separate from the trust, but also is built on the back of that. And we had years of cultural heritage, sport, different things we do. We do themes different years. And that was all in the early days, and on and on. There's a lot to list, but to give you a flavour of the different things we could do from the revenue we got from wind turbines. Because 20 years on now, we've done the obligatory change with logo, and I think as everyone seems to do, but we've also still been busy. I'll come back to the Heat Smart Orkney project, which is an interesting innovation energy project. But more and more, with more confidence and more assets, we started to do larger things. We're building 2 new build houses down at the pier, but that manse that you saw, we're converting into flats, one 2-bed and two one bed single bed to get affordable housing to keep workers and young people in the community. We've taken and supported community key community facilities. We've got a heritage centre down the pier. The local restaurant, as the owners retired and became too elderly, the trust now have took on the asset, and the local pub, and they're combined now into a community benefit society to run that, supported by the trust. And we still have a private shop, but we supported the shop. As I say, we talked about the petrol pump. In COVID, we supported them doing deliveries and things like this, just ways to sort of keep the nuts and bolts of a community in place. And still, the original EV's been replaced by another one. It's still a car club, but we do it as a dialer ride. We have a driven vehicle that takes folk into central services once or twice a month, just keeping people in the community from that point of view. And we're keen, as everyone is, with active travel. We have some e-bikes and things like this. If you want to be really active, Rousey for 15 years has run the Rousey Lap, where you can run, cycle, or walk right around the island. It's 13 miles round. It's a great day out. It's a lovely thing to do. It's a mixture of everyone does it, from very competitive to folk in welly boots and on mono roller skates and all sorts of stuff. During COVID, as a clear example, I think lots of we had the ability to respond, and during the cost of living crisis, we've been able to offer fuel grants and winter bill payments more recently when we're facing new challenges. But I think that's all to give you a feel of what we've managed and hopefully been able to do, and reflects what so many communities are managing to do across the Highlands and Islands. And that was the good news. Slightly more depressing, I would say, that door that opened has mostly closed at the moment. But we do say for now, and hopefully now to go through where we are. I think it's amazing that we've had this opportunity, but I think it is also, there's both now opportunities and challenges going forward. We hit quiet times, as we call it, and we're now very much talking about restarting the growth in community and energy sector. We feel that really came about because whilst overall Scottish renewables had flourished in the last decade, the community sector has stagnated, not just in the Highlands and Islands, across the whole of Scotland and elsewhere. Because previously successful community targeted support was largely superseded by the UK FITs. So the community support was the FIT scheme was great, really effective to drive renewable energy generation in itself. And for a decade, it was also benefited from, but didn't recognise the wider social value of community energy and the previous additional support that was needed to do the groundwork to enable that community energy. So effectively, it sort of cannibalized a lot of good work over the last decade. I'm being recorded, but I'll stick by that. It really has. The future pipeline's been eaten up, and with the previous investment that's been put in there. And also post-FITs, the technology scale and economic models for the sector have changed significantly, and that's causing this quiet times. But to us, that made, for people like Community Energy Scotland, a lot of our members, it was pressing times. What we've done over the last couple of years is we've formed a coalition, the Scottish Community Coalition on Energy, working with similar organisations, grassroots member-led organisations, DTAS, Community Land Scotland, Scottish Community Alliance, and we've had a call to action. We lead on this coalition because we just recognised the power of, but we're concerned about the current status of community energy. Because I say they are really weird times at the moment. It is mixed. We've got unprecedented transformational levels of activity and opportunity happening in renewables nationally. There's no doubt about that, and I'll cover that as we go through. And we have more than 2 decades of experience now of community energy projects and the benefit, value and resilience they create. There's so many challenges now for new build, and some of you probably when we come to talk, we'll talk about your own situation. Operation and repowering now threatens that we not only miss out on current opportunities, but even start losing ground and undoing good that we've done over the last 2 decades. So we felt the most important thing of the last 1 or 2 decades was really have this call of action. And we wrote a paper, as you can see there, the executive summary, there's 5 papers below it, and we're engaging with decision makers and policy formers and stakeholders across the sector to try and do that restart bit and to try and keep the momentum going. At All Energy, we basically launched the 7 asks last year. So we're talking about accelerating growth in the community energy sector, setting a wholly owned community energy target, 1 gigawatt by 2030. And Scottish Government turned around to All Energy and said, we've listened to you, and they launched the Community Energy Growth Fund. It was a good fund. There's 1.5 million. Tom's project benefited from it, but it was just one lot of money, and it was oversubscribed and it was used really, really quickly. That's all we've had so far. But we'd also talk about increasing uptake of shared ownership opportunities, addressing opportunities and challenges arising from repowering, mandating requirement for report on community benefits, updating good practice principles, and creation of Scottish Community Wealth Fund. All but those two are probably relevant to what we're talking about now. And I'll quickly go through them because I think they all show the opportunities and challenges that we have in the Highlands and Islands in the next 10 minutes or so, Francesca. It'll probably be, yeah, cool. So yeah, restarting the growth in community energy sector ourselves. While we're waiting for that, we tend to be an organisation and our members tend to actually act more than lobby, but we're in the lobbying space because I think we need to be. But what can we do as well? So community RevGen sites have scaled up and changed technologies. Most now are about 10 to 50 megawatts and more looking at solar photovoltaic, where traditionally it's been wind that's dominated Scotland. Orkney again as an example. We had 7.5 of the 50 megawatt installed, but the council that had the wherewithal, they've taken to develop these 3 sites of 30 megawatts and taken to do that across the islands. There's no wholly community led, member-based led developments in Orkney, but they're an example locally what's happening. But this is happening across Scotland. You'll hear about West Coast Energy in the Western Isles and looking at 50 megawatt. There's larger scale solars happening, 30 and 20, places like Isla and Arran and places like this. But it is recognising, but the council are doing this, but the council, our own council, and think about yourselves, your own where you are, our own council are making deliberate investment to supplement local taxation and national funding, doing the same as what we're doing at scale. And their project there, they estimate to be 5.5 million annual profit and 450,000 community benefit indirectly that's going out to the smaller communities. So that's one way we're coping with the new thing. Oh yeah, there's a study just because this is justified putting a cable into Orkney, and the study shows not just those direct funds, they estimate 371 million will come from that cable being put in, backed by those turbines. So that's one way, get bigger. But some smaller projects are increasing viability and local value through innovative models of local supply. Rather than just putting up a turbine, we kept it simple when we were focusing on earning money. We're looking at different ways of doing it. Abernethy at Gower, the outdoor centre over there, looked at local supply and storage very early on, and we did projects like Access and Heat Smart Orkney. I'll mention Heat Smart Orkney later as we go through. Oh, probably the next slide. Yes, the next slide, sorry. So Heat Smart Orkney was a project, again, coming back to Rousey, that CES supported in. Our turbine is the one in the middle there on the Rousey Island. The way our grid connection works is the grid monitors how much we export, and it's okay as long as we don't reach a limit. As soon as we reach a limit exporting out that area, they turn us down and turn us off. And we're losing a lot of capacity. We're losing a lot of money, revenue, and production from having that and with our grid connection. So we came up with a project within the area. We recruited lots of houses, put in smart controls, used just simply things like their storage heaters and their hot water cylinders, that if we switched on and put power in smartly, we could actually benefit them and benefit the turbine by diverting the electricity, not having a problem with export. But the key thing was to make it in a way that it matched our local turbine, because it created revenue for the community, but also made affordable heating to the householders. And that ran for 4 or 5 years and was operationally successful. We have to look now, how do we take that forward and how do we finance it? But that was an example. Energy Local is another one that across the Highlands and Islands developed out of a particular grid code that lets you supply and match demand across a certain bit of the grid. And they've been working hard, and CS are working with them and a group of 6 communities across the Highlands and Islands now for a Redress Scotland bid that's just gone in to try and take that forward and develop that across the area. And Tom will talk about Bressay and what they're trying to do there, how they're making their project stack up with local supply. Sadly, also the price of energy has increased overall, and this can help if you match it with certainty. When we started these projects, we actually expected to get grant for our capital and much lower prices. But we also knew before the feed-in tariff, if you can get a long power purchase agreement in place, you give yourself certainty, you'll be able to get affordable finance, you'll be able to take these projects forward. So we've got to relook at that now after FITS. And there's still huge potential for shared ownership and joint venture if we can catch them as they're happening. I don't know how many folk were at the DTAS conference just at the end of last year, but this is Local Energy Scotland's presentation. they show a huge number. They say 137 pipeline opportunities present as huge opportunity and a huge challenge across Scotland. It is a huge opportunity, but I emphasise the challenge. They have a new register where you can go on and look and see which projects are live in your area. But normally by the time it's in your area, it's almost too late. I think some of the issues we have with joint venture and trying to make it work for the last decade is that community have to be aware, ready, equipped, and most of all, have the community informed and supportive of what you're going to do to capture these very large but narrow windows of opportunities they go by. By the time we get organised, the deal's done quite often, and that's been a real challenge to make these worse. And also, if you talk about scale, the difference between individual communities and the scale of these projects are getting larger and larger, and it's getting hard to meet them across the table. So that's it. There is an opportunity potentially now becoming a increasing one over the next few years of repowering older private assets that may offer new community opportunities, ones that were previously in private ownership. Again, CES have a redress. I think we've heard we're successful. I don't think it's been publicised, but the recording we haven't heard yet. I don't think that down in the Cowell Peninsula, where we're working with 3 or 4 communities, looking to potentially see if we can develop their own site, but also take over an existing private site and do almost a community right to buy of that old existing asset. And we're taking that forward in Argyll. And don't rule out community benefit. That's really the last thing. A huge effort has been put into establishing, promoting good practice. And no, it's not wholly quite the real thing as that we get with community ownership. Best practice community benefit can be provide an ownership like chances. And looking at Orkney, we're aware of offshore wind. We've talked about the final piece of the jigsaw is we know we've got 3 gigawatt of offshore wind coming to Orkney, but we don't know if there can be any benefit at all at the moment. I think some of the challenge with this, that was a workshop we did in Orkney. We're trying to bring it to shore. How do we actually bring the benefit and the value ashore? And Tom will have a view on that after for questions as well in Shetland for that point of view. But there's a key thing. How do we engage with these large amounts of money and resources that are coming here? That's just going through the offshore wind developing over the last decade. It went from 10 megawatts back in 2006 with a demonstrator. There's now 42 gigawatt planned around our coasts at the moment, and 42 gigawatt is 20 billion megawatt hours of energy a year, but 100 to 200 billion to install it, and 12 to 15 billion per annum of revenue coming in. And that's good, isn't it? But how do we make it good and good for us, and to make it good so it produces local value? And I think that's the key thing. It goes back, there's a lot of it's lobbying, and we're trying to do that and make arguments and say, look, this is how you can do it well. Learn from these last 2 decades where we show what happens when you really invest and give the communities the power and the agency to be able to solve their own problems. And that's all going on very live at the moment. But don't forget, there's going to be large funds. Some of you may have heard about the SSEN regional infrastructure fund as well, where there will be hundreds of millions over the next decade as well that they're going to want to assign and spend in community benefit. And we want to make that real value and convert it into real value. So really, to sum up, my colleague, before I showed them this presentation, they said, make sure you got three key points at the end of it. I think we're in keen times. It can feel bleak at the moment for community energy, wider society in the world with what we're facing, the challenges we're facing. But I do feel this lull is passing for community energy. There's a huge opportunity just now if we can secure it. We're in the best position ever as far as showing what we can do when we given the resource in the community. We've got a huge pedigree now of what we've done over the last 2 decades. And already the lessons learned from these projects is being used to tackle wider issues, from community-led mobility and transport, decarbonisation, climate and biodiversity emergency response, but also dealing with digital connectivity and even mental health. This model of community energy and working together and organising has been shown to work. So we can offer that. We can offer that to people whose job it is to deliver it. And frankly, the need to drive and wider buy-in has never been greater, I would say, at this point. I honestly feel that. But I think we only hit the window last time because we were supported to be ready, and we know what to do this time. And there really is enough time when underway. I've looked back over the last 20 years, when did I take a breath? There's very few times. The thing I'm thinking at the moment is, can we use this time to identify, organise, get consensus and plan so we can take advantage of these opportunities? There is huge amounts of opportunity coming in this next decade. So that's really it. I like to always finish on a slide that I found a few years ago is this idea of the fourth box, sorry. Someone first of all was trying to explain the difference between equality and equity. And the difference is often making the solution fit the problem and the situation. And I think it's so key to what we do and those first two panels. But then they created the third box and the fourth box, and it went open on the web that people could put in their own. We all want liberation. We all want the barriers removed, like the fence we can see. But even better than that is if we play part in the game, and then we can really help the solution. And that sounds trite, but it's absolutely key to underpin what we've done over the last 2 decades and what I hope we can do for the next 2 decades and beyond. That's me, Francesca. Thank you. And Tom will talk about some very practical examples of this, hopefully, and where we're at. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. That was a really good overview from the past to the present, and I really appreciated the positive ending note. Yeah, very empowering. Now we have Tom, who will introduce us to the Bressay case study in Shetland. When you're ready, Tom.
Great, thank you. Thanks for the invitation, and thank you, Mark, for the comprehensive view there. Really good. I'm just going to pull up my slides here. Yeah, and assuming I don't ramble too much, it's going to be a slightly shorter presentation and really kind of focusing on a snapshot of the kind of things that Mark's been talking about, but specific to the place where I am, which is Shetland and the island of Bressay in particular. So Voar is essentially we're a consultancy company working for communities, project developers, and also government organizations on the energy transition. My first slide here is just a bit of context setting, similar to what Mark was saying about, the kind of scale and pace of energy developments. Here in Shetland, for 70 odd years, our electricity network operated independently of the UK network. Last year, we got our first connection to the UK mainland, and that was linked to the Viking Energy wind farm project, which at 443 megawatts is about 9 times Shetland's peak electrical demand. And although it's not quite the biggest project in terms of the capacity of the wind turbines installed, it is going to be the most productive onshore wind farm in the UK, just given the nature of the strength of the wind that we've got up here in Shetland. And over the coming years, we're going to see probably a second electrical interconnector to the UK mainland and a number of further onshore, you can see onshore wind projects here at either end of Yell, and another one which you can't quite see on at this scale, just outside Lerwick here, Mossy Hill. So, you've got 9 times Shetland's peak electrical demand already installed in the form of Viking. You've got another sort of 200 plus megawatts of onshore wind, and then 2,800 megawatts of offshore wind coming. And from the community perspective, one of the interesting things here is that, we were told for a large number of years that, once the interconnector came, we'd be able to do more community energy projects. The way it's worked out is actually that, in Shetland, there's kind of been a lull for a longer time than what Mark was speaking about, probably for Shetland's maybe slightly behind the curve with one exception on community energy. But what's actually happened is that the big commercial projects have essentially secured most of that grid capacity. So as well as the lack of feed-in tariff, there's also just, can you actually get certainty that you've got somebody to sell your power to? Can you get a grid connection, essentially? That's one of the major stumbling blocks at the moment as well. So that's, I guess, the Shetland context, and in some ways it's just a kind of exaggerated example of the national picture that Mark was talking about. This is the Viking Energy wind farm. It's 103 4.2 megawatt turbines. Like I said, the most productive in the UK. This was originally conceived as a community-led project, in the sense that the community was going to own 50% of the project. for a number of reasons that we probably don't have time to go into in detail on this call, that didn't end up happening, and this project ended up being built as a fully commercially owned project. And although they pay the standard level of community benefit, £5,000 per megawatt installed, that basically results in 2.2 million going into the Shetland community. Whereas the Garth Wind Farm, a community-owned project in the north of Yell, despite being 100th the size of Viking, on a good year they can put about the same amount of money into North Yell as this project puts into the whole of Shetland. So this we have one of the starkest examples in the country of the value of community ownership of energy versus community benefit from commercial projects. And basically going back to those projects that I showed you on the map previously, if you look at them on a graph here, we're in 2024. The Viking Energy wind farm came live last year. We have the Garth wind farm, which I mentioned, 4.5 megawatts. There's also a similarly sized local business-owned project at Borrowdale, a couple of other projects around Shetland, which are either community or locally owned. But when you plot those projects against the scale of the commercial development that's coming, they're not even visible as a pixel on the graph. So we've been doing a bit of work at Voar for the Just Transition Commission, which is a commission set up to advise Scottish Government ministers on how to make the energy transition fair. And one of the points we've been making is that it needs to be easier for communities to do their own projects. But of equal and potentially more importance in cash terms is getting a fair share of value out of the big projects that are coming, if you can. This graph basically shows the 3 Statkraft wind farms coming on in 2030, and then the offshore projects in the mid-2030s onwards. The green growth there is kind of more hypothetical, but you've got the operators of Sullom Oil Terminal talking about making 1 million tons of green hydrogen per year. And if you want to do that, you basically need this much electrical capacity. So I think, there's a kind of the question of like what's a fair share of value from renewables seems like quite a hot topic at the moment. And there's increasing calls for greater community ownership and benefit from these types of projects. But if you think that's a hot topic and a heated debate when we're at this point in the curve, just wait until we're further along the curve. So I think it's really important to have events like this and share knowledge and perspectives and keep having the conversation to try and achieve some kind of balance in this sector. Just going on from what I mentioned previously, we looked at kind of 3 different ways that a community can participate in an energy project. And at one end of the spectrum here on the left-hand side, a community can be the passive recipient of community benefit payments. And I mentioned how much that relates to in the Viking context. The other option, as was originally envisaged with Viking, is that the community gets in early and becomes a participant or partial owner of the project. As Mark mentioned, you really do need to try and get in early there if you want to have a significant stake, because when the concept is defined and the project moves through the planning and technical design phases, essentially the risk is progressively knocked out of the project. And so if you're offered an ownership stake just before the things go live, you can be fairly sure that you're not going to get particularly interesting return or have much influence on that sort of project. You really want to be in there early, as Mark said. And then, the dream from my perspective, the kind of holy grail, if you can achieve it, is full ownership. There's a number of barriers to that, as Mark's outlined and as we've found through our work with Bressay. But I think, to my mind, part of the challenge here is being ready so that if this landscape changes, which it may well do, we're seeing GB Energy coming out, the UK government, with supportive words around community energy in the local power plan. The Scottish government in their planning guidance, national planning framework, for talking about the need to prioritise community wealth building and community energy. the kind of language of government is shifting to acknowledge the need for more of these types of project. But what hasn't really happened yet is that the barriers to developing the projects, i.e., ability to get a grid connection and some sort of guarantee on the price of the power that you can sell through that connection. Those have not yet been resolved. But to my mind, if you don't get on the front foot and agree as a community, as we're trying to do in Bressay, what sort of thing is it that we would like to do if we could do something, and then you won't be ready for when the landscape changes. So we basically were recommending that community benefit payments should also be linked to project revenues. A wind turbine in Shetland makes you twice as much power as one on the UK mainland. So at the moment, those are discretionary. Developers are not obliged to pay benefit payments, and a lot of the developers would actually welcome a level playing field rather than a kind of grey area. And then we need to strengthen the capacity of communities and regional governments, local authorities, to participate in commercial projects and support communities to do their own projects. I'll now talk briefly about the Bressay feasibility study that we've been doing. So Bressay Development Limited, community development organisation of the type that Mark was talking about, they secured funding from the Scottish Government CARES scheme, Community and Renewable Energy Scotland scheme, to do a feasibility study, and they've contracted us to do that. We're about 3/4 of the way through the project at the moment. I've got a note here as well, just to say that it's not just CARES. There are other funding sources for doing that sort of feasibility study. One example in Shetland is actually the community benefit fund from the Viking wind farm. This is a feasibility study for a community project is the type of thing that they would support. There's also the Coastal Communities Fund, and I think Andrea and Francesca will be better placed than me to point you in the direction of the different kinds of funds that could support a study of this nature. The first thing that we did, which was actually slightly outside the scope of the narrow scope of the feasibility study, was just to look at what is Bressay's power demand. So on this map here, these are the electricity lines rather than the road network, and the red dots are domestic users of electricity, and the blue dots are agricultural sheds. And then the one thing that we do have, the north end of Bressay is a large industrial user of power, which I'll come on to talk about. So we looked at the kind of total power demand of Bressay to think about the size of project that might be appropriate. We also looked at different renewable technologies, including, as well as wind and solar. We looked briefly at battery energy storage as a standalone thing, and possibly community heat. Obviously, a place like Shetland, wind is the obvious thing to do. It's a much stronger resource, as you can see in a kind of indicative way on this graph. Of average power is the axis here. There's no units, but it's just to give you an idea of how much stronger as a sort of energy source the wind is rather than the solar radiation. And it obviously peaks in the winter when the demand for heating is highest. The problem is the grid. So there's a large amount of wind capacity on the Shetland grid already. It's challenging to get a grid connection. Solar PV, there's not much of that on the grid, so you're going to be slightly out of phase with much of the generation that's there. It's also simpler technology, and we kind of came to the view with BDL that solar PV project was kind of potentially a lower hanging fruit that we could go for in the first instance as a kind of entry-level community energy project. I think still be aspirations to look at wind in the future, but as a first step, we decided to look at solar and battery energy storage. This is the north end of Bressay, and you can see here the Pelagia's fish meal and fish oil factory. They are supportive of the idea of a community energy project, whereby the idea would be that a project owned by Bressay Development Limited could sell power to this commercial user of power, and thereby that potentially at a time of grid constraint is useful to have a direct off-taker. Although the devil is in the detail there. It doesn't necessarily make it easy for you to get your connection, but it's certainly a positive having an existing user of demand that you could potentially sign a power purchase agreement with. So we've been looking at their power demand and how it varies over the year. You can see the big spike here is the herring season, when they take in a lot of fish waste from the factories, and various peaks around the year with shipments of salmon. So highly seasonal power demand, peaking at nearly 500 kilowatts with about a 50 kilowatt average baseload. So, approximately speaking, Bressay's total demand is about 5 megawatts. That's what it sort of peaks at. I think I've got that now. I maybe don't have that graph here. But, you can see also how the fish factory's demand varies on a daily basis. So this was quite interesting. I wasn't necessarily expecting this. I thought they'd have a night shift as well, but you can see that the daily power profiles for power use at the fish factory are a good match with solar. The power demand ramps up in the morning and ramps down in the evening. So this is the kind of details that we've been looking at to assess the feasibility of a project in Bressay. We also looked at how the demand varies over the year. The domestic demand obviously peaks in the winter and drops in the summer. Hyogen is kind of doing its own thing there based on its own industrial use. A lot of people in Bressay were a bit skeptical about a solar project at 60 degrees north, really. We wanted to show that, the kind of scale of thing that we're looking at is actually mid-range among the Scottish solar projects. There's a lot of much smaller projects, but equally 0.5 megawatt is not, it puts you kind of mid-table of the kind of projects that are being looked at. And yeah, this is the kind of thing that we might be speaking about for a 500 kilowatt solar project. We're also looking at our plan at the moment is basically to try and get a grid application and get the wheels moving on a larger solar project, but being aware that that might take a long time to get over the line. We're also looking at what we might be able to do under the so-called connect and notify options, which is basically the grid rules will allow you to connect up to 3.7 kilowatts per phase. So in a house, that would be, your 3.7 is what you can connect. Although interestingly, the modern inverters, you can actually have double the size of panels that your inverter can handle. So you're connecting, you can see in the table here, the grid limit might be 3.7, but you can have an inverter size to that capacity, and you can have double the amount of panels. And in the middle of the day, you might not be using all of your panels, but it does mean in the beginning and the end of the day, you can be getting more out of those. So for a domestic maximized project, you might be talking up to 18 panels. For an industrial user with a 3-phase supply, it could be 50 panels. And if we're able to get a grid connection for a larger project, you could be talking, 1,000 panels plus. So yeah, that's just a kind of high-level overview of the kind of thing that we've been looking at. We have done a whole lot of community engagement activity around this. Mark and others were kind enough to come along to this event. You can see here, and it was a lot of the folk in Bressay found it quite inspiring to hear from some of these communities on the edge. Obviously, Bressay is the centre of the universe. Everyone else is peripheral to us, but it's good to hear from what other communities have been able to do, and even within Shetland, the North Yell experience, but also hearing what had been done in Orkney. I think people were coming out of that meeting quite energised, feeling that if Rousey can do it, surely Bressay can do it. So that's where we're at with the project at the moment, and look forward to having any questions and keen to learn from what other people are up to as well. I think that's my last slide. This just recapping the kind of the 3-pointer at the end, as you said, Mark. I think to our mind, it's it's about doing more community energy projects if we can do, and it's also about making sure that we get a fair slice of the big commercial projects that are coming. We're also doing a piece of work for Shetland Council at the moment, looking at what a fair level of community benefit might be from onshore wind versus offshore wind versus hydrogen, working with Community Energy Scotland and Aquaterra on that one as well. And I think one thing that we see is that these project developers are they're big, well-organized, experienced organizations, and communities they can benefit from support to understand what is actually an appropriate and viable level of benefit to be going for. And what's the best way to participate in these projects. So thanks for your time and open to collaborate and learn from others on the call. You've got my email there as well if you need it.
Thanks, Tom. Really interesting and also really empowering. So yeah, thank you very much. Now is the time to ask your questions to the guests, or we can ask some as well. I think someone already puts one in the chat. Was it you, Katie? Do you want to read it out loud?
Yeah, I've got so many questions, but the one I put in the chat was about the coming grid reforms in 2025 and whether or not, well, I don't know what's going on in the lobbying area and what's going on with the national grid, but as far as I'm aware, they're looking to there's a lot of grid capacity across the whole UK system that just isn't being used. It's essentially being bought up or reserved by large developers and then not being used. So does anyone know if within these reforms coming this year, there'll be provision for community energy projects to get some space there?
I think to the narrow part of your question, I think it's very unlikely. Certainly something that was one of the things we had on our slides in our report for the Just Transition Commission was this idea of ring fencing capacity, because at the moment the capacity is not there, so but I'm not particularly hopeful about that. I don't know if you're plugged into any other conversations about it, Mark, but I think it certainly should do. The other wider point about those grid reforms was really, all the evidence was pointing at zonal or nodal pricing being by far the best thing for the consumer, and actually, in Scotland could potentially lead to sort of having some of the lowest energy cost in Europe. But the way that it was phrased in the document I read was sort of like, well, we don't want to damage investor confidence, so we better not do that. So I've got low optimism about what's going to come out of that, but we certainly should keep banging the drum for it. And I think there's some good local examples of Colin will maybe be able to speak to this one. We're aware of one local developer here who essentially sent 500 emails to SSE complaining about a certain aspect of the rules, which seemed to be completely set in stone and no way around them, and they did eventually budge. So it's possible.
I saw Colin had his hand up, so I'll let him speak. I will have some other stuff to say, but if that's relevant, Colin, do you want to come ahead of me?
Well, there's a few things. I mean, we're not speaking about the problem up here is this curtailment. I mean, I went up Dunst this weekend, and there was about 50 knots on the Saturday when I went up. No windmills turning in Viking. So I thought, fair enough, maybe they've sort of shut it off because the wind's too strong. Came back down on the Sunday, it was 20, 30 knots. Perfect, you would have thought, we're producing a lot of power. Again, no windmills turning. So Viking Energy are not interested in providing a service. They're quite happy with it. They got a bill, they got the same 2 million the first month of their production that they pay a community benefit for a year in curtailment payments. So it's gone in Shetland now because the communities can't get on the grid now because there's Viking and there's Statkraft. But I think Viking has put the whole thing back because everybody was, well, I mean, all the people that are for sort of wind energy and that, and they're seeing this big beast coming in here, almost stopping all the community developments, and they're getting paid millions for not turning. So to me, it's had a really negative effect. I don't know what anybody else thinks.
Yeah, I mean, just picking up on that, first of all, I mean, a good quality of service and good connection. So we get curtailed, but we don't get compensated. But by doing that, we didn't have to pay the reinforcement.
Oh, I think we're losing Mark.
I mean, as long as this continues, we're never going to get cheap energy up here.
Mark,
Yeah.
we lost you. We lost your thoughts there because you cut out. Can you
Okay,
repeat
I never
what
lost
you were
you.
saying?
Sorry, no, that's okay. Yes, no, I was saying in Orkney there was slightly different with the A.
Oh no, we've lost him again. But I get what you mean, Colin. It's the same here on Skye. There are some really big developments coming up, and it's turning everyone off community energy because they're scared of more wind turbines, because there are so many coming up from large scale developments.
Can I jump in very briefly on that one? Sorry, Anne, I'll just be 2 seconds. I thought that was the case in Bressay, and actually we had a community engagement event last week where I said, I just want to confirm my assumption. I'm assuming, given, Viking and all that, folk probably don't want to see more wind turbines. And then I asked for a show of hands, would you support some kind of community wind farm on Bressay if it was going to be to Bressay's benefit? And almost everyone put their hand up. So I think it's, I certainly in Bressay, I thought it would be that everyone was against wind, but they're actually just against loads of wind turbines that they get nothing out of.
Yeah.
Sorry, Anne, I'm conscious you're next.
Right. Okay. I'll jump in here there. Yes. Just been to the CARES conference yesterday, which was very inspiring, and we did have the Minister, Dr. Alistair Allen, give his pronouncement. So there was an announcement of 3.5 million for the growth fund. So that's good news that it's actually bigger than it was before for the next financial year, and 1 million for development support and 4.5 million for decarbonising buildings. So that was some positive news. And we did have the GB Energy spokesperson at the conference, which apparently is the first time the UK government has sent a delegation to the CARES conference. So that was also encouraging that they are, that they are actually, the UK and Scottish governments are talking to each other. So yeah, that looked promising. There's 3 of us here, I think, from Highlands People's Power, which is a very new organisation we've just launched in the autumn. So we're looking at doing some sort of joint ventures Highland-wide rather than just the small ones that have been done so far, but also looking at something small scale to get started. So possibly solar, as has been said, is an easier thing to start with. So we'll see what TV brought. We'll see what happens about that, but the other 2 can maybe talk about that as well. Thanks.
Sorry, Anne, I don't know if I dare speak. Am I still here?
Yes.
Yes. Sorry. No, that is good news. I hadn't heard back for Zoe from yesterday, Anne, but I didn't. It's great that they've announced the amounts for that. And likewise, we've got the repowering a new generation. I'll make a plug. There might be a few places left in Glasgow on the 18th of February. Community in Scotland are doing a session just looking at how we do new generation and repower the old ones. It's mainly just community groups talking about each other, but yet to each other. But we do have the Minister Michael Shanks and Alistair Allen coming as well, which is great. They do seem to be working together. I'm a little more. Yeah, it's great. It's great. It'd be great. And the CARES contract has obviously been not announced yet, but it will be restarting in April, and we're all waiting to see what it is with those budget sums. That'll be a good, healthy start for it, I think, for that point of view. I'm trying to the problem is I don't want to go back to grid too much because we could spend about half an hour talking about it. Key points, I would say, in our calls to action, the most radical approach, and I think we have to take it at lots of different layers, this attack or this campaigning that we're doing. And we've tried to argue that you should have a right to connect in the same way as you have right to buy. As a concept, we've put it out there because we like that as a really clear way, and it ties in with social justice in Scotland in a really strong way. But we know that we won't get that into the Grid Reform 2025, Katie. There's just no way for that point of view. but we have got a team working with communities in the Western Isles, the Outer Hebrides mostly, and we've been trying to put codes into the grid reform. We were going for derogation to allow communities special derogation, so to get access and not have such burdens, financial burdens. That's not flying at the moment, but we have got them willing to identify and have communities as a distinct characteristic, which will then let them do special things for them. But even then you hit Ofgem, and Ofgem are now wanting a definition of community energy to be able to work it in. I think there will be small steps, but I think at the point for that piece of legislation, it's good to get in there that a community exists as a character and a unique character, so that we can then use it in the future, because if it's not built into that, we won't be able to. So that's one of the immediate ones. So it is just working out. But I think most of all, as we all know, if we look across Highlands and Islands or look across anywhere in Scotland, we're so limited at transmission now, effectively, where anything you do above either 200 kilowatt or 50 kilowatt in the Isles, you actually have to look at and take into account transmission going forwards now, and that's going to be a real killer. So we have to look more, and we're focusing more on local supply and local twinning as alternatives. That's probably a quick grid answer. Sorry. That's what I was going to say earlier, but thank you. And yeah, welcome that, and it's great that the Highland Power, People's Power as well. I'm thinking how we're working together. I mean, from the point of view, I think someone came along to see your meeting, but that is what we're trying to look at in Argyll, and just see how we can come together. I mean, CS's own asset is a joint venture with a local housing association in Berwickshire, and just seeing how we can get critical mass so we can engage in this opportunity, I think.
Can I just come back on that? Well, one of my questions yesterday was about interconnectors, because I was realising that we only seem to be sending half the power to England that the interconnector was supposed to take last year. Seemed to be going at half cock all year, so that obviously has a major impact on, if we're producing a lot in Scotland, but it's just not able to go anywhere else. I think there's a new interconnector to a Northern Ireland, but there's basically no interconnectors from Scotland to any other countries. So basically, it's all got to go through England if it wants to go to Netherlands or France or anywhere else. I thought originally that Viking was going to have, there was going to be a hub, and then there was going to be an interconnector going to Scandinavia as well. And I don't know whether anybody knows whether that's actually at all likely, because I found something that said that the Norwegians had said no, and it got sort of just thrown out.
It's sort of a concept, but I'm not aware of that having been developed further. They are talking quite firmly about the second interconnector to the UK mainland, but any kind of Norwegian one seems a way off yet.
But I mean, we really, if Scotland's actually got producing as a country is producing more than we can actually use at any one time, then it would be better if you had more options to go directly to the continent.
Yeah, completely. And I don't believe it's dropped off their long-term plans, but what their long-term plans mean at this point, Anne, is very hard to say. I mean, one of the more positive ones, as you say, is the interconnector, the offshore connector going down the east of England and linking in to the North Sea infrastructure, which potentially creates another route. Because as you say, we have the same problem in Orkney, when we've had a cable down for a long period of time, and then you're actually either limited to nothing or half your production across the two cables. Joining up's better, certainly.
Yes, Gary. Yeah.
A question possibly for Tom, but maybe Mark. Why isn't the government actually going for public ownership or community ownership, rather than they're still trying to put most of the money through private investment? Like other countries like Denmark say that you get 20% to community as standard, but we're still messing about with community benefit payments at like almost trinkets for the natives sort of thing. So I just wondered, why, do you know why that ethos is still in government?
Because they're very right wing. I mean, it's not in Scotland's hands, and the UK government are consistently right wing. Like, the irony is that in the UK we privatized our whole energy sector, and then it got bought by the governments of other nations. So in the power sector, you know, you've got Statkraft of Norway, ESB from Ireland. In energy in general, you know, you got Total from France, EDF from France. There's a big list of basically Total's not one of them actually, but yeah, state-owned power companies. Other states currently owning our infrastructure. So yeah, I totally share your frustration, and I think it's just a function of the politics of people that get into government, unfortunately.
I wish I was going to disagree very strongly with Tom, but no, I mean, I watched it since the 80s, basically. I mean, that's what we've done. We've sold off all our assets. I do think, if I was going to be positive, I do think that actually UK government, genuinely the team that are looking at energy, want to do something in community energy, and they recognise they're going to need to, and they're putting a big chunk of GB energy behind community ownership. Where that's going to be, it took them a while to realise there was a border, there was any land above the north of the Scottish border for a while, and a lot of the provisions were just looking at England, but they are working towards it. And I think that's the more positive thing. I worry though, as you say, their hands, even political hands, are very tied, that they have to be seen to follow on with making it, not doing large investment. There's no sort of new Green Deal or anything coming through it, but I think they are genuinely looking at how they can do it, because they've got such a challenge to do it. And there will be GB Energy, sadly, I just even heard this last month. Well, basically, we go to meetings where before you'd struggle to get a meeting in the UK government, and you turn up now, they're inviting you, and there's 12 people there. They're really keen on community energy. What that's going to mean practically, I don't know. Some of the negative we've seen is that, like, as I say, I mean, GB Energy sounds like they are going to have it, so it's a loan lending organization rather than an investment organization, which just doesn't help us that much, I think. And I can see them focusing. It's always, the more, I'm not being cynical, well, I'm being cynical, I'm being world weary. The longer I do this, I think if people can't do it well, they'll do it badly, and they'll use that money and put it offshore, go into the private companies. But we've got a chance at the moment to try and help them do it as good as we can. So a lot of the push is to try and shape it. The local area energy plans, what they're doing at this stage is to shape it. And we have influence. And I didn't realise, I mean, it's funny you were saying it, Anne. Suddenly we've got Michael Shanks. You would never get a UK minister to come to something in Scotland, but he's turning up to Voar event, and there's only going to be 50 people there. Because he's Glasgow based. We have a politician in the Western Isles who's very active as well. I mean, Torkel over there has already had ministers out to the Western Isles looking at community energy. I think we've got a bit of an opportunity. So if you think and give any opportunity, get it in front of them now, because we want to help them make the right decisions, if that's the way I'd describe it.
Yeah. Well, obviously, the Welsh government are doing their own thing, which unfortunately Scotland can't do because the Scotland Act doesn't do it. But you would have thought the councils, we approach Highland Council to say, do you want to sort of get involved in this? And they said no. You would think all the councils from Scotland would get together and just produce their own energy company, but we put that to the Scottish government, and they weren't interested in that at all.
No, it's a shame. And there's no reason against it. I shouldn't say this in front of Tom, but I mean, of course, because Orkney Islands Council did invest in the first wind farm, and now they're building their own just to underpin their own running costs going forward with their Orkney Community Project. And that's only 90 megawatts, but there's no reason we shouldn't. And they have the power and the ability to do that. And maybe just pushing. I mean, Highland Council have been great on the community benefit side and taking a stance on that and pushing the industry. But actually, it would be great. There's no reason that a local authority cannot be taking a stance and actually taking their own ownership or working with local communities and jointly.
I mean, you're getting Orkney's going to. On you go on. Sorry.
No, they keep on, the Highland Council keep on saying they'll get back to us, and there may be some opportunities to work together, but it's difficult to know whether they actually will or not.
Yeah.
Sorry, carry on. So
I was just going to say that Orkney, the council wind farms, I spoke to a guy from the council, and he said, essentially Orkney's going to get more out of those projects despite them being a third of the size of what we've ended up with, So there's lots of good examples out there. There's also, I'm going to just hijack this very briefly, show you a thing. Just Mark and I were in the Islands around about a year ago, just comparing 3 island groups. So, Shetland population 23,000, Faroe about double that, Åland a bit less, and essentially in Shetland it's separated and privatized at every level, generation, grid, and retail. In Faroe, the whole thing is publicly owned. In Åland, the interesting example was that the grid, distribution, and retail is either local government or local consumer cooperative owned. I was surprised to learn that all of their generation was private. And I said, so what sort of community benefit arrangements have you got there? And they said, what is community benefit? And I said, it's when you have like it's actually pitch perfect. I've been practicing. They said, what does community benefit? I said, well, it's a way of sharing value with the local community. And they said, oh no, we are just taxing the shit out of them.
Yeah.
So they have like a municipal system of taxation in the Åland Islands, which means that there's no negotiation around community benefits. It's just if you do a project, you will pay a significant amount of tax to the local community, and that's your community benefit. Thank you very much. So there's loads of different ways you can do this, and there's a whole spectrum of possible options. It's just we tend to be at the wrong end of the spectrum often.
Yeah, I don't think we've ever got over that trip. I'll just add to that. It dismisses community benefit. It's just about community right. I mean, they own the waters 4 miles out. So anything in those waters, they own it. You have to pay rent to it. All the communities, like small community councils, then get rental, and because they have right to it. It's a very different world, but it's a good one for us to put in front of our own decision makers and policy formers.
Mm-hmm.
Katie.
Gosh, why did I put my hand up? Which question was it? I think it was.
It wasn't about my accent and which side of the globe I was supposed to be from, was it?
What kind of community benefit does Shetland get from Viking? Like what they offering?
So at the moment it's this is another thing that Mark and I have been looking at in the context of another question, another project is at the moment it's £5,000 per megawatt, and that was established in 2010 by the Forestry Commission. And then I think 2012, it was adopted by the Scottish Government as their good practice principle, £5,000 per megawatt. The problem there is that that's £5,000 per megawatt of generation capacity installed. But as I said, a wind turbine in Shetland makes you twice as much power. The same wind turbine in Shetland makes you twice as much power as one on the UK mainland, and so there's no link to revenue. And we've been saying that communities should be aiming for a share of revenue, so that it's a proportionate. The benefit the community gets is proportionate to the amount of money that the developers.
We've just been offered that. That's quite interesting.
What percentage?
Well, they're looking at it. So Muirhall, who are looking to put a big development on the Isle of Skye, Glen Ullinish too, and they're looking at shared revenues. Oh no. Well, no, they're not. Sorry, I'm just trying to. I think they're wanting to offer shared revenue instead of shared ownership. But in terms of community benefit, they're offering £7,000 per megawatt. But we're worried that it's based on installed capacity. They're basing it on export capacity, which I suppose would be good. Which is that what you're saying you want?
Yeah, you need to look at the details of it. Our kind of recommendation is to aim for a revenue share. But to have that backed by a guaranteed minimum so that you have some level of income security for the community. but it's almost like a floor, like a guaranteed income level. Our recommendation was at least £7,300 per megawatt, which is what £5,000 per megawatt would be today had they index linked it back to when it first became a thing. The thing is that projects keep connecting and paying £5,000 per megawatt, £5,000 per megawatt. Every new project that connects is actually paying less than the previous ones because the 5,000 has been eroded by inflation. But yeah, I think that the combination of a guaranteed minimum income payment of about 7,300 and then a share of revenue, and basically we've been arguing it may depend on the project. Not every project might be able to handle it, but our target would be 5% of revenue, and actually that's what the Scottish Lib Dems have been saying as well, is £5,000, 5% of gross revenue. And it's important to note as well, gross revenue, that captures any generation income they make, but it would also capture any curtailment payments that they get. So whereas if you were to go for profit, they could basically they could shift it between business units and load up overheads and make it, profit you can disguise, and generation income doesn't capture curtailment. But if you go for gross revenue, you account for those two things.
Thank you, that's quite helpful.
Cool. I think that's a version of that council thing's going to be public, isn't it, Mark?
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah.
Yeah.
And also to add, that is also in line with the Highland Council as well from that point of view. The 12.5 is quite close to that for the region as well. So yeah.
Yeah, so the difference there is Highland Council were asking for £12,500 as a fixed payment, and we're recommending up to 5% of revenue, which puts you in the same ballpark. But it also means that if the developer has a bad year, they don't have to pay you quite so much money. But if they have a good year, then they're able to share more of the revenue. So it's kind of meeting them some part of the way there, in that you're not saying you will pay us £12,500 every single year, however well our project does. You're saying, we want this minimum and that much of the revenue, so that it's basically risk sharing rather than such a hard demand.
Yeah, I was just almost just saying it for context, that for the point of view of reference point for Anne and the others. But no, I agree. And it takes us back to fundamentally that thing about ownership-like relationship. We're not scammers. We're not unreasonably demanding stuff. We're willing. We think we have a right, and we have some ownership of our environment that we live in. But equally, we're willing to take on responsibility and risk as part of that, and that's more of an ownership relationship that you have with the activity, and that's, we think, is a very reasonable and fair way of going forward. Is that fair, Tom?
Yeah, totally.
Any other questions?
Yeah,
go, Katie.
Just one more. So I don't know if you think, I was thinking about what you were saying earlier about the heat system that you've got going on in Orkney with excess energy produced from your wind turbines, and what we've been saying about not getting, watching these massive developments out of our window turn off their blades and getting paid loads of money, and everyone around us not having central heating systems or being freezing cold. So I was just wondering, do you think there's a world in which that we could speak to the big developers about using their energy instead of when they have to turn off their wind turbines?
Yeah. Firstly, I suppose I'll fill this one. First of all, they'll have to be incentivized to do it, Katie. Where they get paid for doing nothing, they're going to continue to do that, I'll be honest. The Orkney situation, we got a grid connection that was fragile. So we only get access to the grid when it's available. So the imperative was on us, and we were trying to pay back loans. So we went out almost in desperation to try and find out novel ways of using that. And I think that is, but I think also the middle ground is something like the energy local situation, where people will only get grid access at a reasonable price if they're doing things like locally twinning and things like that, and that will make it an affordable way to get a grid connection. So you can actually have a situation where that will happen at a smaller scale. The larger ones, I think anything, the big offshore winds and the big onshore, to get them to change would be legislation, because why would they? It's like you say, they won't let you take what they've already got on their table, I would say, unless that's changed the legislation without any risk. And they would say, why would we bother? But I think promoting local and promoting the fact that when we do locally, we're creating resilience in a grid at a local level, and we're creating value, actually is a good way of getting the support for that model, the model like Energy Local and stuff we're doing, and a justification of why we're going to have projects going forward, because we can fill in the gaps. Even that, I mean, everyone's getting really excited about offshore wind. It's going to solve the problem. At best, it's only going to solve the problem in 2035. We've seen what's happening on a daily, on an annual basis as far as impact of climate change. We need to be quicker. We need to be taking every opportunity we can to fill the gaps. And communities within the grid and within the landscape can fill in a lot of gaps quicker than a lot of these big projects are ever going to do to build them out. So I'm going off. I'm drifting as I tend to do. That's some of the answer to the question, I think, is it? Yeah. Sorry.
We have 5 minutes, so Anne, yes, please go ahead, just to let you know.
There in relation to Katie's
yes, of course,
question.
Yeah.
One of the presentations yesterday was from the Isle of Egg, which I know many of you will know their original project, but what they're doing now is trying to produce more energy, because currently they've got enough for just about their electricity, but they're still using some backup generation. Obviously they haven't got a grid connection, so they're having to think laterally, but they are very much thinking of tackling heat and transport. And so I think I would recommend talking to them about their plans, because I think a lot of it could relate to Skye and other sort of, like, I mean, we're a peninsula on the Black Isle, so the same sort of idea that if you can use the energy for heat or transport, then it doesn't have to go through a grid so much. So I think that makes a lot of sense.
I'd also, I mean, CARES, given its due to Scottish Government over the last decade, have funded quite a lot of work to look at those novel ways of doing it, Anne. And the ones I mentioned, Access and Heat Smart Only, but there's a lot out there. If you're interested, do go onto their resource website, where you can see a lot of other projects, or get in touch with people, either ourselves or others, and we'll be able to give you examples. There's a lot of innovative stuff that's happened in the last decade for different ways of approaching it. But it's always, in the end, you've got to make sure it stacks up, so it covers its cost, and I think that it's viable, and I think that's the key thing. I think, yeah, egg is a good example, but I'm almost slightly nervous in the same way we supported ones like Mull, I'll get them all, Muck and Egg and Fula off island. Islanded systems are quite unique. They're really quite hard. Wherever possible, don't go off grid. If I said anything sensible today, wherever possible, use your grid connection if you can. I mean, it's such a best. The Infinite Bus is such a good battery, such a good storage, and such a good cheap way to be able to best manage your energy as a generator or as a user. But yeah, so I mean, I think it's so much harder if you have to balance everything every day, the whole time, like places like Egg. But there's a lot of value now in balancing whilst you're on the grid, and that's the models like Energy Local and things like that are doing that. It can be a household level, it can be a glen, or it can be a large part of the grid. It can be a sort of a bit of the distribution network.
No, Dart as well. Yeah. No, sorry, Anne, I didn't mean to rush you. I just wanted to remind everyone that we have we're finished at 3:30, and it was a really interesting discussion, and I wish we could continue. Any last thoughts? No? Well, thank you very much to everyone who came along, and thanks to Tom and Mark for sharing their experience and knowledge. And I will send around a quick recap document with a couple of links that may be useful. And yeah, see you at next event, I guess.
Well, thank you. And thank others like Anne as well. I don't think we had enough time. I think we could do it another hour talking to this.
Absolutely,
There's so much,
yeah.
there's so much information. But and I do wonder if we can come back on different themes. Maybe Francesco try to focus on large revenue generating. But I think there's so much interest and knowledge in this.
Yeah.
Even just here, I think it'd be good.
If there is anything in particular that you'd like us to cover for the next time, please, just reach out and we'll try our best.
When would the next time be?
I think one good thing to do might be, like we could, I mean, this wouldn't necessarily be instead of something else, but a bonus activity would be, Mark, we might come back once the results of the council study are in the public domain, and we could speak in a bit more detail about what we've recommended to Shetland Islands Council on this.
Yeah, I deliberately almost skipped over the community benefit bit of my talk, thinking it was outside the remit of today. But I think it's a huge area and a huge opportunity. But we'd be wrong not to mention it. Yeah,
that would be really interesting.
Cool. Yeah, thanks for your time, everyone.
When were you thinking of another session?
So we're currently restructuring our tasks. So we have to understand who will do community energy versus who will do other topics. So we have to decide that first. So probably after March, I would say, as a minimum, but I can't give you an exact date now. But I'll definitely let you know. We just need to allocate the tasks basically, and who is doing community energy. There's so much, so it makes sense.
It'll be very good, especially even for this, if we have more clarity on cares. As you say, Anne told us the global budget, but if it's clear that we are going to have again those same growing community fund and the different ones again, and that would be brilliant. And we know we'll have the team confirmed hopefully in the next 2 or 3 months, I would say.
Sorry, Katie, Anne, did you want to jump in?
I just put it there. I was like, we could just do a whole session understanding the grid and like how that affects what can be done where and things like that.
Did you say lifetime? Did you? So
yeah, no, it would be good. I think if everyone else is keen, like it does seem like there is so much to chat about, isn't there? On this, it would be good to do turn it into a series and like get into depth on each part. Who is this?
That's definite generation. That's proper generation, isn't it? Look at
that. This is Isla. This is my next task.
Don't worry, Ella, it'll be all sorted by the time you've grown up.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm just staying with my daughter at the moment.
Oh, lovely. Yeah. Yes, so all points have been noted. So yes, we'll work on this. And thanks again to everyone. And we'll be in touch. Also, Mark and Tom will be in touch with you as well, clearly. Thank you so much.
No,
Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.